Greetings, fencers. So, my search for a messer that suits my needs has finally come to an end. I've tried a few different companies wanting a messer that has a wide profile with the cutout, safe flex, a thick edge, under a 70cm blade, an actual knife hilt, light enough for fast sparring but still has blade presence. I have found it, the safest sparring messer I've ever used with the profile and feel of a Langes messer. If you are looking for a steel messer, this is my recommendation.
Greetings, fencers. So, this is the Landsknecht Emporium messer, the Gottfried. So, every messer that they sell you can buy sharp, thin blunt, or thick blunt, and this is the thick blunt version. So, as you can already see, I thought this messer deserved a bit of an intro because it is a fantastic knife. It is the safest one that I've used and one of the nicest feeling that I've used. So first we're going to go through all the things that I like about it, and then we're going to go through a couple of the nitpicky details that are cons, and then also just a couple things inherently that you might want to know getting a long knife like this, or some changes that you might want made. Things that aren't necessarily downsides, but just inherent factors with a shorter knife like this. So starting at the tip, it has a very thick tip, which is nice. I haven't felt the need to actually put a blunt on it yet. Because it also flexes effortlessly. And so people actually sometimes don't even quite feel the flex. It really doesn't have any impact. But it's nice that it is actually quite a thin tip, so you can actually stick a blunt on it, whether rubber or leather, quite easily. It's not too much of a hassle to do it. As you can see, it does have a nice wide profile, with a fuller running down the entire edge of the blade. Now overall, this long knife is actually quite light. It's only about 755 grams to maybe a little bit heavier because this is the thick blunt, but still I'd assume under 800 grams, meaning that it's quite a light weapon. That is significantly lighter than a lot of the other long knives that I've used, and so it's very easy to move around, but it still has that blade presence. So it actually has about almost a 5-inch point of balance, which is really great. So it still feels like a knife. The blade is wanting to move forward. It's not a light blade with no presence in the bind. The edge is also fantastic because it's a 4mm to 3mm edge the entire way through. So this is absolutely fantastic. I hate 2mm edges. Those find the gaps in all your gear. We do a lot of wrestling and long knives, so oftentimes wrists get hit, both on spec heavies and sparring gloves. This makes it a lot harder to find the gaps in the armor, as well as just displacing the force over a wider area, and so this really doesn't hit hard. What they've also done to make sure it doesn't have a super heavy tip is, because it's a thick blunt on the sharp end, they've kept the other side quite thin. And so the spine and the short edge are actually quite thin, from 2mm to 1mm. You don't hit people there very often, so it's not a big deal, and it keeps the tip nice and light. Now, as I've said, the flex is pretty effortless. It just happens without people even realizing it. There isn't often a reaction on someone, so they'll just push through the flex. This sword, you can feel a little bit of the flex as you swing it. Now, because it is a short weapon, it's not very floppy. But if this was a long sword, it would be way too floppy. The reason I know that is because we have a Landsknecht Emporium longsword. Not here. I have used it. It is very floppy, and definitely doesn't get used very much here. Now, the reason we like long knives that are under 70cm blades is because that's roughly the length of our arm. And so we always want to find long knives like this, because this means we can't actually just set off and thrust. We can't just make a thwart cut and hit. We always have to use our offhand to control as we hit, or we have to get very nice windings or sneak into distance to get a clean hit. We can't just use single tempo moves to get hits and blocks in one motion, which changes up the fighting. Now, getting to the hilt, the Nagel is peened, hasn't bent in at all. It's definitely taken hits. The quillins are fine. They're reasonably short compared to some other long knives that I've used. And what's nice is this actually has a knife hilt. So this is wood pressed on each side of the tang. But that does come with a downside. Because it's wood at the pommel, one hit has actually taken off just a chunk of wood with the grain at the very tip.
Oh no, took a piece of wood off.
And wood is also slippery. So when you're wearing sparring gloves, it does slide in your hand a little bit. You don't get quite a good grip, so that's why this is taped over. And now it's a very nice grip. I can use it with any glove and effortlessly swing it. I'm not going to worry about my hands sliding up it. So this long knife is definitely the nicest one that I've gotten to use. It's just so safe, so fast, and feels and looks like a long knife. It's actually significantly safer than our synthetics. This has given way more bruises. It's a lot harder for people to control and use, and obviously it doesn't flex. So I'd even consider, if we run a long knife tournament, having 2 of these, and these would be the standard weapon that everyone would use. That's how much I like the long knife. They do have a couple other types. They have a longer, thinner one, and a broader one. Now, a couple nitpicky downsides. One is it has this little square at the underside of the nozzle. That just rubs up against your finger when you're using it barehanded and just scratches your pointer finger the whole time as you switch from thumb on the blade to thumb off, and it's just not comfortable. I'm assuming they have it there as a reinforcement for the nozzle, but most of our other long knives don't have that there at all. So I'd appreciate that being slightly more rounded, but especially with gloves on, it's able to pull on the stitching on top of sparring gloves, and it might eventually come undone. And for me personally, I find that the blade is just a little bit too flexible, where people aren't really reacting to it at all, and that I feel the wobble when I'm swinging it. And that's mainly because the flex actually starts quite early on in the blade, more at the first third as opposed to halfway. A lot of the other long knives are completely rigid when swinging it, feel nothing, and the flex is still good enough that in general it's pretty hard to hurt someone. Now, one thing to know, if you're looking at this long knife and you're wanting it for tournaments or stuff like that, if it's a bring your own steel tournament, the downside of something like this is that because it's so short, you're really just going to get thrust, and then you can't reach them with your sword anyway. So you'll be forced into always having to use your left hand or into getting controlled thrusts. So that's the downside if you're really wanting this as a competitive long knife. But for club sparring, it's definitely my favorite long knife. Also, noggles kind of suck, especially for gloves. So this does fit under a medium sparring glove, but under a Spec Heavy, it gets caught every time, like with most noggles. So if I'm holding it around, I switch the thumb on the blade and I switch back, it gets caught on the plate, and often in sparring, it gets caught underneath the plate. That's always a little annoying, so you can never comfortably use this. So what I'd usually recommend is make sure that you know what glove you're using, and if you're using quite a big glove, ask for a straight noggle. That way you know that you can use it with your glove. So I can't recommend this enough. This is just an excellent long knife, and probably more people in the club will be getting Landsknecht Emporium long knives because they are definitely the best ones I've gotten to use. So thanks for watching, keep studying, keep practicing. Recommend. Oh, did that break? Oh, dang.